Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of the CelebrateMuliebrity podcast. I am delighted to introduce my learned colleague and friend, Grainne Donnelly, who's going to chat to us today about her research, her journey with understanding how the female athlete works and how we can serve her better. We're going to talk about diastasis. We're going to talk about her recent adventures at the Female Athlete Conference and about her PhD journey, which we're all very excited about as well. Grainne is the co-author of the Return to Running Guidelines and is also the current editor of the POGP Journal, is a researcher, a clinician, and just makes it all look really easy, and we don't know how she does it, but we're kind of in awe of her in general. She's a bit of a rock star. Grainne, thanks a million for coming on, and welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thanks, Michelle. And I was listening to that laughing because we're all inspired by you and Trailblazers. No, I'm being serious. You set the scene and done things. So yeah, don't be fooled, anyone. It's not, that does sound like, actually, when you repeat that back, that sounds like I'm doing a lot. And I am busy and I am doing a lot. But I've also stopped doing a lot of things and prioritize things. So it's not unrealistic, because I sometimes think that life can look like you're doing everything, and I'm not. I'm picking and choosing.
Good girl. I think that's a really important message for women professionally, that, you know, you can have it all, but you maybe can't have it all at the same time.
Definitely not. And there's sacrifices. There's definitely things that I'm choosing not to do. So don't be fooled. It's very much, I've sorted out things that I want to do and fitted them in. I'm still busy, but I'm definitely not doing a lot of things that a lot of people are doing.
Okay, so I think you're kind of like this swan, and it looks like you're effortlessly gliding across the lake, but underneath the little feet are paddling away.
Definitely, that is me. That's a good analogy. Yeah.
Very good. So tell us about the Female Athletic Conference in Boston. What did you like about it? You were talking, of course, about postnatal rehab. Is there anything exciting and new happening in postnatal rehab?
Firstly, I love the conference. So if anyone isn't familiar with it, check it out. The Female Athlete Conference in Boston, led by Kate Ackerman and her team. Fantastic, multidisciplinary, very welcoming from whatever background you're from. I was actually really excited for the first time, Michelle, to see that there was a talk by a physiotherapist, I think from the Middle East, on hip pain and differential diagnosis to consider pelvic floor. So this is one of the first time. I have a big pet peeve about this, that sports medicine typically ignores pelvic floor and its functions and its differential diagnosis. So to see this as an actual talk, I was super psyched. So that was something that really stood out to me. And other than that, there was just a lot of awareness in postpartum and perinatal transitions, which was fantastic, because again, we need more airtime for this and not just one tick box talk in a conference.
Yes. Exactly. Couldn't agree more. And I just, on the note about hips, I will at this point give a shout out to Stacey Futterman, who's a pelvic floor physio in New York, who I think was one of the first people to start putting those pieces together. And she published a paper, I think 2015 or 16, about femoroacetabular impingement and vulvodynia. And of course, you know, like that for me kind of was really, you know, just, I suppose, an insight into how we can marry MSK and ortho with pelvic health, you know, and we can't just look at body parts in isolation. It all goes together, and especially with the pelvic floor and the hip, you know, they're so close together. How could one not affect the other?
Oh, common insertion points or near to insertion points and dual roles, you know, like it's just, it sometimes baffles me that, you know, at times I was sitting at this day and age that we're thinking, how are people not considering it? And when you have a talk like that, it's a real penny drop moment where people are like, oh yeah.
But you know what, I'm going to say that I think sometimes as pelvic floor physios, we can be a little bit guilty of that as well. We can be very vagina centric.
100% agree.
And, you know, and I think as well, then there's some really nice research, isn't there, looking at the role of the deep hip rotators at menopause. When we start to lose some of that striated urethral sphincter and we have muscles like obturator internus, that we know if we strengthen the hip rotators and abductors and extensors, they can be really helpful. So I think that's an emerging, maybe for your second PhD, you could have a look at that.
Yeah, just when I've got loads of free time, Michelle. I think you're right.
Yeah.
Maybe you could do it.
Moving on. I would love to bring your thoughts about diastasis into the mix here as well, because a couple of years ago, I heard you talk about your PPP RRR, double LD, just your framework for talking about diastasis. And I think it's brilliant because for me, it just ticks all the boxes. It's a very, it's very much that biopsychosocial lens of looking at diastasis and decatastrophizing a lot of the fears that I think both women's health professionals and also the women who have diastasis maybe have about it. So the stage is yours, Grainne. Tell us all about your thoughts on diastasis.
Thanks, Michelle. And this is a topic I'm hugely passionate about, and one that I'm dabbling in bits of research with as well. And it's funny, I remember that for anyone listening, Michelle was it was one of my first public speaking gigs, and Michelle happened to be in Northern Ireland, and I asked her for the opportunity to present or practice in front of her for feedback and thoughts, and she very kindly mentored me in that, and it was fantastic, and I will forever be indebted to you because I appreciated your advice.
Can I just say I had very little to do because you're as I said, I love the way your mind works. It's so logical and insightful, but immediately clinically applicable. And that's what I see coming through with all of your work doing. It's stuff that you can take into clinic the next day. So I'm going to throw that right back at you and say, you know what? Yeah, brilliant.
Well, thank you. We can both thank each other. Brilliant.
Okay, we'll both bask in it.
But yes, so that's one of my things. I really like clinical reasoning and instigating or trying to provoke clinical reasoning in myself and in other health and fitness professionals. And sometimes I think that as health professionals, we can become a little bit prescriptive, where we just do what we were told to do or what we've seen someone else do. And I'm like, where's the thinking and logical reasoning for that person in front of you? And it's, as you say, it has to be individualized. And that triple PRRLD framework that I put together was really a clinical reasoning tool. So it's not a protocol, it's not a proforma that's a one size fits all. It's how you can think about different aspects of the person in front of you and bring it all together to inform your decision making. And it basically goes through different biopsychosocial factors. And the first one I start off with is person, and I think that's the most important. So who is that in front of you? What's their background? What do they want out of this session? Or what's their hopes with diastasis? Are they having realistic expectations? But we go through a lot of things, from everything to loading to considering posture, which is always a controversial one. But I always think that what elements of posture are relevant, what does the research support, and how can we bring that into the equation? And also is considering things like, it finishes with D, which I might actually ask you, have you any suggestions for a maybe less fear-inducing name? Because when I created, I called D at the end defect. And I do mean, because I think you can have hernias, I think you can have skin changes, but I don't like the negativity in the name either. And so anyway, if anyone has any nice suggestions for how I can change the D at the end, I'm open to it. But really with diastasis, I think we need to move beyond the gap. I think that's been clear anytime we've discussed, Michelle. It's not just about interecti distance. It's not just about that midline. It's about the entire abdominal wall and the person attached to it. And hopefully, if we get through the validation process, I'm working with a Spanish team of researchers, and we're validating a survey we developed, patient report outcome measure that we developed for diastasis or diastasis, that will capture the biopsychosocial elements of it. And so we pilot tested it. We're now validating it to see if it's sensitive or if it actually tests what we're looking at or captures what we're looking at to capture. And if it is sensitive and shows or proves to be validated, it'll be a really useful tool for clinical practice, and it'll be something that one puts diastasis on the radar of the medical and public health systems, because sometimes I think it's very much overlooked and considered just to be cosmetic. So I think it'll really start to bring in those biopsychosocial implications of it. But I also think it will give us a validated tool to repeat measures, how someone's starting off, what score are they having, after we do a period of rehab, what score they're having, so that we can capture things that aren't just interecti distance focused, because we're setting ourselves up to fail. I don't think that's the be all and end all. And I think women are more resilient than they think. And we don't have to be scared of it. It's actually, and I'll give tribute actually to Anthony Lowe for bringing my mind to think about this, but it's a really smart adaptation of our body. It's there for a reason, to let the abdominal wall expand.
Yeah.
But that actual dominant tension that we see, it's a really strong structural shape. So if you think of architecture, bridges, pyramids, all the strongest architectural shapes are domes or pyramids or tents. So I think it's very clever of our body, and we need to champion that rather than be fearful of it.
Yeah. But at the same time, we do have to acknowledge that a lot of women are. And I think, you know, what you said was really important, that from a medical perspective, unless somebody is going for, say, an abdominoplasty or something like that, I think it is kind of disregarded, perhaps, as, you know, or you're just worried about how you look. But if how you look is a barrier to exercise, is a barrier to intimacy, is a barrier to living your best life, then we definitely, if we are going to be biopsychosocial, we definitely have to take that into account. So what, again, you know, the framework is brilliant because, you know, it talks about respiratory and diaphragm and posture, but it also is very person-centric as well. Are there, in your learned experience, are there links between things like diastasis and back pain and urinary incontinence? Are there any other issues that we need to be aware of? Because the research has been a little bit mixed on that, hasn't it?
So I'll start off by saying that there's a sheer lack of research on this topic when we consider other topics. So it could be that we just don't know enough yet. But when we look at what the research does tell us, contradictory to what I see in clinics, so I see women turning up with diastasis and urinary incontinence, and that they report that they feel it's linked, or diastasis and back pain, and they report that they think, again, their perceived idea of it is that there's a link. But the research actually doesn't support it. So it would show that there's not really any significant higher risk of getting back pain or incontinence if you have diastasis compared to if you don't. These are things that are prevalent in this population anyway. Now, when we did a systematic review before creating the patient-reported outcome measure, the things that we did show were correlated are things that you've already mentioned. So the body image, self-confidence, self-esteem, but also abdominal discomfort. But it was abdominal discomfort that wasn't so much described as pain. It was more described as bloating and discomfort. And there was also some association. Now, there is a weak correlation with pelvic organ prolapse. And again, that makes sense in my brain at times. I think we need more research in this, but I think some women are more genetically predisposed to diastasis. And I think given that predisposition, there could be similar predisposition to the likes of pelvic organ prolapse, because it could be a connective tissue. It's how their connective tissue adapts. Yep. So I'm really excited to see people researching this more. And I'm really, I'm super psyched about it, and I can't wait to see what happens. But fun fact, another study that I'm involved in with an Italian group of researchers actually, and I'm so delighted to be involved in it. It's going to look at the influence of social media posts on women with diastasis and their exercise behaviors and perceptions. So are social media posts being good at informing people? Are they not? And are they being fear mongering? It'll be interesting to see what that shows. So we're doing some mixed method study there. So stay tuned.
Edge of my seat. So, like, in a nutshell then, you know, what is the best way to address diastasis? Because again, there are so many different ways. And like, even just recently, there was a paper that came out that said, you know, crunches don't make diastasis worse. And I'm like going, okay, well, that's great. But, you know, what can we do? Like, what are maybe some of the missing pieces, do you think, in how we're looking at diastasis and helping people live with it, but hopefully maybe even improve the situation if it is distressing for them?
I totally agree. And I actually want to say, when you mentioned about if it's distress in women about how they look, I do agree, even for the fact of, I talked about Conan and tension not being something that is awful because it's actually a really smart body adaptation. But if you're in an exercise class and you're wearing clothes and you don't want to see something appear and bulge out of your tummy and seem different to everyone else, that is distressing. And as women, I do think, as much as I'm a champion for going against all the body image pressures and things, as women, we do feel body image pressures. We do want to look a certain sleek. We want to fit into the clothes we used to wear. Like, that's just normal ways that we feel. And so I do think that we have to listen to the person's goals. So if someone wants to improve the aesthetics of it or reduce the pendular abdomen, that's certainly a goal I'm taking in mind and trying to work towards. Do I know the best way to do that? I still have a lot of understanding to develop in this. But I have had multiple cases where now it's all about the right load at the right time and progressive loading at the right time. So it's looking at that individual and looking at their baseline and then progressing, strengthening, but progressing it to way beyond what we used to do with women with diastasis, including myself. Like, I used to cap myself and very much be cautious about diastasis when I think back earlier in my career. And now the more I've nudged that fence and progressed people further, I see the benefits of it. So I do believe that you can't go wrong getting strong. I know a lot of people say that, and I think that it's a very, very catchy line, but it's true, because strength and conditioning serves us in many ways, but I do think that it is one of the things that will lead to tissue adaptation if there are changes to be made. And that makes sense. We know that if we load connective tissue, if we stress it enough, it will lay down collagen. And so I guess that's the goal. My other thoughts, and where my brain really hopes that more research comes out in, is looking beyond the midline. I do think that it's the entire abdominal wall that experiences stretch. And I do think that even the lateral borders of the rectus muscle, the semilunaris, I do see women when I'm scanning them. Now, you don't feel a gap there. You don't feel it in the same way as you feel midline separation. But with imaging, you can see asymmetric widening at the linea semilunaris. You can see symmetrical widening. But so I do think that there's given those elements too. And I think that helps me understand better why I may have two women coming in with 3 or 4 centimeter midline separation, but they both have very different appearances in their tummy. One can be, could maybe mask, or you wouldn't know they have diastasis under clothes. The other one has a very pendular abdomen. And I do think what's happening at those two lateral borders gives more give and widening for that pendular abdomen. So I think it's a research area that we need to look into.
That's fascinating, isn't it? And it kind of brings back into play then the kind of some of the R's from your framework, like looking at respiration and diaphragm and rib cage mobility, and just really bringing that in. I want to just circle back, because when you were talking about your research, and I don't remember if it was the Italian group or the Spanish group, but you were talking about how that sense of bloating. And I think as well, nutrition is really important as well, because we know that women, twice as many women as men experience IBS. And we know, of course, like the gut-brain axis, and if there's emotional dysregulation, that's going to have an effect on bowel function as well. So I think like it's a complete rabbit hole that you can go down, isn't it? In terms of exploring different avenues to help people.
I totally agree. And I love that. And I'm not as nutritionally informed as you are, Michelle, but it's certainly a huge consideration of mine. And I do think that, again, like you've touched on, the stress element that exists with the concern and the anxiety that surrounds it, and how that has an impact on the gut, and how that then has an impact on the appearance of the abdomen. Like, there's just so many steps. And that's why we can't just be indirect distance focused. We have to look at that person, and we have to help them understand how all these other elements may be part of the picture. So addressing one of them isn't going to be the answer, but it's this idea of collectively looking at different elements, and hopefully they all come together. And I see that's the way I practice, no matter if I'm seeing someone with diastasis or pelvic organ prolapse or incontinence. It's this idea of what are all the factors that might be contributing to this. How do we how do we reduce those down so that we're starting to narrow in on what's the lingering problem? And once you start to educate women in a way that they understand and that's meaningful to them, they get it. Yeah. Whereas I think if we don't explain that to them, it can seem a bit airy-fairy and that we're looking at all these other things, but they love it and they're hungry for the information. And I think we have a duty to inform women to a degree that they should be informed to.
Absolutely. And empower them then with that education so that they can make choices about what path they want to go down. And you know what, to not be, I've seen some very judgy comments, by people who do end up going for abdominoplasty, and you should just accept it, and you should just try physio. But honestly, the difference that can make to somebody's mental health, and I remember hearing Eilish Fitzgerald, the plastic surgeon, talking about this, the difference that it can make to somebody's mental health, but as well as that, to back pain and to incontinence as well. We really just have to meet people where they're at and do our best to help them. Give them a menu of choices and let them pick from the buffet, what way they want to go with their bodies and their lives. Totally
agree. And that's the only place that there is that it does challenge my bias when I'm looking at the research is when we look at the surgical publications, because there are cases where urinary incontinence was almost immediately, fixed. And there is elements where you can challenge that and go, well, how much of that is belief, perception, the relative rest period that follows that was actually helpful for all presenting conditions? We don't know, but we need more research. I had the honour of attending Eilish Fitzgerald's surgical theatre, seeing one of my clients have an abdominoplasty, and that was a huge decision. And I do think that these surgeries can be life-changing for people, and they shouldn't be. In the same way as we have surgical pathways for orthopedic conditions, for gynae conditions, this is no different. And so if conservative measures don't meet someone's needs, expectations, desires, wants for their goals, their life, they have every right to go on and access the help they need.
100%, couldn't agree more. So, as well as, you know, all your research internationally, you are also the editor of the POGP Journal. You are teaching coursework on not only on pelvic health, but also on ultrasound, on ultrasound imaging. You just recently taught a webinar on research methodology. Oh, and casually, let's just slip it in that you're also doing a PhD. Tell us about that.
Yeah, Michelle, sometimes I'm like, oh my goodness, someone needs to talk to her and take her aside and tell her to say no. The journal has been a huge learning curve for me, being editor of it. It's a huge honor to be asked. I initially said no a couple of times because I thought I wasn't ready. But I caved and I've said yes, and it's great. I love it. I love looking at research. I love everything about it, and I love making sure research gets out there and gets translated. A lot of work. So yeah, don't be fooled when you get these journals out and things like that. A lot of work goes in behind the scene. I'm getting my eyes well and truly opened. But I'm also doing a PhD, and what I'm going to look at is the mechanical, perceptual, and physical changes or influence of adjuncts to pelvic floor rehab in postpartum women return to running. So the two adjuncts I'm choosing are education, because we always say women need educated more, but has anyone tested? Does that make a difference? So we need to look at that. And also compression garments. So I've already started researching compression garments. I do think there is a role. I'm trying to figure out which women benefit from them and how much they benefit and the why they benefit. So I'm super excited about that. Yeah, and I'm really hoping, because pelvic floor muscle training is the gold standard. We've lots of research. We know it works. It's really good. But we need adjuncts to serve women who reach rehab potential and don't get all symptoms resolved, and also women who want to access functional activities and life while they're rehabbing and their symptoms are resolved. And also, we then don't know what preventative influence there may be. So the future has a lot of research to be done, but I'm really interested in looking at that, and super psyched that hopefully, all being well, if the stars align and all goes to plan, one of my studies is going to involve MRI and pelvic floor modeling. So I've linked in with some bioengineers and things. So that's exciting. That ticks my box. I'm just really excited.
Wow. First of all, I think that's, again, what, you know, I love the clinically applicability of everything that you're doing. Like, because that's stuff that people can take into clinic and start using straight away. I do think you are steering the POGP Journal in a fantastic direction. The most recent edition.
Not sorry.
No, I think it's brilliant, because it's a huge amount of work. First of all, I'm glad, you know, you said that out there, because people think it's easy doing things like this. I had the pleasure of interviewing Elizabeth Culleton Quinn in a recent episode. I mean, her paper was fantastic, you know, to really look at, again, the qualitative, but the fact that we can bring these articles into the main conversation arenas, I think is fabulous. Just before we wrap up, I couldn't have you on here and not talk about the return to running guidelines, which were really a game changer. You know, the full paper itself, all 19 pages of it, but also the infographics that you published, you know, with Emma and with Tom, and really just to bring that, you know, into some sort of a logical pathway. You know, first you do this, then you do this, look at GH and PB, look and see what's going on. So it's that combination of objective markers, but then, you know, at 2 weeks, think about doing this. At 6 weeks, think about doing this. I can only imagine a huge amount of work must have gone in from yourself and Emma and Tom into this. What's been, you know, what was your thought process in putting this together?
So Michelle, that was a whirlwind, and when I look at that journey, like, and it's so random. That's how I met Emma, and that's how our friendship began. It was one of those random things.
Shout out to Emma Brockwell.
Shout out to Emma Brockwell. Absolutely, yes. Everyone knows her. If you're not following Emma, follow her.
I mean, come on, who doesn't know Emma Brockwell?
Everyone knows Emma. But we basically started off. So it was Tom and I had a conversation, and then Emma had been in touch with Tom at different points and asking questions. So then we brought Emma on, and that's how we all connected. It was starting off as a blog, like, let's put a blog out there about how we need to think about postpartum women. And then when we started looking at the research and realizing there's none in postpartum women, spoiler alert, we then started to delve wider, and it's like, how wide do you go? Because you're going into all the other research, and it got bigger and bigger and bigger. And we were like, nearly like, we can't just do a blog because we have more to say. So we ended up with this big document that we put out as a white paper, essentially. And we probably, when we put it out, we thought maybe a few people would look at it, read it. We didn't think it would be received as well as it was received. And that was very nerve-wracking. I just want to be really clear about that. Before, I remember the day we put it out, it was International Women's Day 2019. We purposely put out in that day. And I remember sitting with right to hit publish. And, really, because there's a vulnerability about putting work out that hadn't been out there, and we're starting to look at things, but there isn't actually anything on this research. Now we're extrapolating. I was nervous, but thankfully they had been received really well and they've been used, and they're a starting point. They're not the be all and end all. There's definitely more research to improve those. And they're a clinical reasoning tool rather than a prescription or protocol that's stuck and rigid. So I want to be clear about that, because we had to put timelines and suggest the timelines out because that's what clinicians want, but not everyone will fit directly in that box. So don't be afraid to vary out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's a really great point as well, but it's great to have a starting point, like to have a recipe that then you can kind of riff on a little bit depending on the person in front of you. I mean, it's really been, I feel like, kind of talking to colleagues all over the world, it was really a game changer. It's very hard to believe that there wasn't any research about this before you put this out. I mean, wait a minute, is it that hard to believe though, really?
No, it is though, because I knew that internationally searching we couldn't find anything, but I kind of assumed that there must be something in other countries. I'm just not finding it. My ability to look for where they are is failing me. So when it went viral as such and nearly was being used, I was like, oh my gosh, there's actually nothing in all these countries, because they're all now using, like, that blew my mind. I was like, whoa. And it shows that I also would like to give a shout out as I enter further and further into research. And, research is a process, and there's, peer review publications are actually very hard to do. And I've got a new appreciation for the work that goes in. And when I'm reading papers now, I'm now like less critical to go, why didn't they look at this or do that? Because I'm like, they probably weren't allowed, or something blocked them some way. But what I would say is that white paper we put out into the public domain shows that there's a merit for that type of approach as well, because they definitely wouldn't have went as viral. They definitely wouldn't have been as accessible if we had put that into some sort of peer-reviewed publication, and they would have been reduced way down to a certain word count. So we need to look at our academic structures too. I do think that there's a grey area, and I think that we need to be comfortable in that.
Definitely. But I think, again, that's an area that you are actually bridging the gap in, because you're coming from a very clinically applicable perspective, and now you're swimming in the research waters as well. So to be able to kind of wear the two hats at once, I think, because a lot of the papers that we've referred to, over the past, say, decade, have possibly been written by people who are not clinically active. And so with all due respect, I think it does make a difference.
Completely. And that's one of the biggest things I see. There's that missing part of the actual clinical aspect. And it was so interesting because I was doing data collection recently in Cardiff Met as part of my PhD, and it was just fascinating to see the other research team were getting an insight into what we actually do as our job. And even just their understanding now of when they're reading papers has really improved, because they get what the pelvic floor assessment's about. And I think there needs to be that cross working between academia, clinical practice. There needs to be each sector informing each other, and we need to serve women better and serve everyone better, but women, pro-women.
Women especially, because to be fair, women's health has been neglected, in the research, but also just clinical awareness as well. And kind of to wrap things up, kind of where we started, looking at that intersection of orthopedic, musculoskeletal, athletes, but everybody has a pelvic floor, and if we're looking at it though through a female-centric lens, like the influences of menstruation, the reproductive years, you know, obviously postnatal and menopause and beyond, we know that heart health is the biggest killer of women worldwide. And we know that exercise participation can reduce your risk of dying of a heart attack by about 30%. But also, you know, I keep coming back to that research by Dakich, you know, that pelvic health is a barrier for 1 in 2 women from participating in exercise. And that's why I think what you're doing is so important, because we want to have women active and healthy and happy and enjoying their life. So it's not just about the length of your life, but actually the quality of your life as well. Not to be worrying about leaking or prolapse or diastasis, because there's so much that we can do to help women live well, you know. And I think it's really important that we just bring it into daylight and to have these conversations so that people do realize there's help out there.
Oh, I love that. And I do think it's so important. I totally agree with everything you said. And I think that you, Michelle, we have to turn the lens back on you a bit, because the work that you do, no, I'm being serious, and all the things that you raise and the reach that you have and the way you explain things, I actually love the way you explain things is in a really meaningful, easy to understand way, because you make something really complicated and I'm like, oh, I can understand that now. Couldn't understand it then, but now when I was reading, I was like, so I really appreciate all you do, and I appreciate your collaboration and your championing of other women, because I think that's sometimes rare in our world, and I really love it. And you're
very kind.
You're a rock star.
No, you are. So, Grainne, where can people find out more about what you're doing and follow you on social media, and about your podcast, At Your Cervix, which I've had the pleasure of being on?
Oh yeah, I love At Your Cervix. So At Your Cervix, the podcast, you can find us on Instagram if you just search At Your Cervix. You can find me, my website is www.absolute.physio, and I'm on socials at absolute.physio. So yeah, find me anywhere. I'm happy for anyone to contact, email me, whatever, have a nosy at some of the content, and if you have any questions, get in touch. But yeah, there's a really cool, badass group of health and fitness professionals, all of us looking to really elevate our understanding of women's health and support women. So follow everyone and join the community.
Speak up. And yeah, I think that's it. Sometimes, you know what, I do feel like sometimes we are off in our little huddles talking amongst ourselves, and it's to kind of bring things into daylight and just shine a light on them, and normalize the conversation around pelvic health as well, because, you know, the numbers as they are not good, and we can do better. And the first way that we start is, as you said, with education and conversation. So, Grainne, thanks so much for all your knowledge, for all that you're doing for women's health, both at a professional level, but also at a normal person level as well. Because I think, I really do think, you know, not blowing smoke, but I do think what you're doing will literally change the direction that we're going in professionally. And we're all very grateful for you.
Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. But I'm also totally cringed and embarrassed. Thank you.
Excellent. My work here is done. All right, everybody. Thanks a million for listening, and I will catch you on the next episode. Bye for now.